Good day everyone. For today's discussion, we will be going to discuss the history as well as the concepts and theories related to critical literacy. But before we start, let me introduce myself first. I am Francis de la Peña, your discussant for today. Our main topic is critical literacy. But before going to our lesson proper, let us first enunciate the importance of literacy to the education and to students. Literacy is so fundamental to learning that its importance cannot be overstated. It is said to be the foundation of education. The ultimate aim of any education system is to equip its children with the necessary literacy, numeracy, and wider skills that they need to take control of their destinies and fulfill their potential. On International Literacy Day, year 2020, the Director General of UNESCO, which is Audrey, enunciated that literacy is the first step towards freedom, towards liberation from social and economic constraints. It is the prerequisite for development, both individual and collective. It reduces poverty and inequality, creates wealth, and helps to eradicate problems of nutrition and public health. With the definition and explanation enunciated by Audrey, the Director General of UNESCO, we can see a glimpse of what critical literacy is. But before going to that definition, these are the learning objectives of this discussion. Upon the completion of this discussion, students are expected to, first, explore the history of critical literacy, second, define and interpret concepts and theories of critical literacy, and lastly, value the importance of critical literacy on classroom setting. For our first activity on this session, write and jot down 3 words that you have seen in the box. Share it to the class and describe what you expect to learn on this session. Instead of sharing your 3 words right at this moment, you can reserve it and share it on our next session to MS Teams. What is critical literacy? How it developed and how it became an essential foundation to education. Critical literacy. It is the ability to read text in an active, reflective manner in order to better understand power, inequality, and injustice in human relationships. For the purposes of critical literacy, text is defined as the vehicle through which individuals communicate with one another using the codes and conventions of society. Accordingly, songs, novels, conversations, pictures, movies, and etc. are all considered texts. The development of critical literacy skills enables people to interpret messages in the modern world through a critical lens and challenge the power relations within those messages. The history and theory of critical literacy. The term critical literacy was developed by social critical theories concerned with dismantling social injustice and inequalities. These critical theories contend that unequal power relationships are prevalent, and those in power are the ones who generally choose what truths are to be privileged. Through institutions like schooling and government, these ideologies are supported, thereby perpetuating the status quo. Within schools, only particular knowledge is legitimized, thus excluding groups who are unable to contribute to the process of authentication of that knowledge. That is why, according to Anne Beck, critical educational theory or critical pedagogy are necessary that applies the tenets of critical social theory to the educational arena and takes on the task of examining how schools reproduce inequality and justice. Yes, schools reproduce inequality and injustice. Critical social theories are concerned with the oppressive and unjust relationships produced by traditional forms of schooling and critique the traditional models of education, which typically place the teacher at the front of the classroom possessing and transmitting the knowledge of students who sit ideally learning, or receiving the information. In The Pedagogy of Oppressed by Paulo Freire, he described and gave an example of how critical literacy is developed in an educational context. Freire proposes a system in which students became more socially aware through critique of multiple forms of injustice. This awareness cannot be achieved if students are not given the opportunity to explore and construct their own knowledge. Freire described this traditional type of education as the banking concept of education. This model of education is characterized by instruction that turns students into containers, into receptacles, to be filled by the teachers. In these classrooms, knowledge is bestowed by those who consider themselves knowledgeable upon those whom they consider to know nothing, and the teachers separate themselves as the being the possessors of knowledge. In this role, the teacher does not necessarily challenge the student to think authentically or value students' own funds of knowledge. In opposition to the banking model, teachers who recognize the possible value of developing critical literacy do not view their students as the vessels to be filled. Instead, create experiences that offer students opportunity to actively construct knowledge. In this model, schools become spaces where students interrogate social conditions through dialogue about issues significant to their lives. Teachers engaged in critical literacy serve less as instructors and more facilitators of conversations that question traditional power relations. According to this quote, knowledge emerges only through invention and reinvention, through the restlessness, impatient, continuing, hopefully inquiry human beings pursue in the world, with the world, and with each other. No man is an island. That is why reciprocity in terms of education and knowledge sharing is really important. And of course, invention and reinvention also. Development is a is a unending process. With this development, critical literacy will develop too. Using critical pedagogical methods, teachers create spaces where they can be learners and students can be teachers, thus providing a context for everyone to construct and interrogate theories of knowledge. In opposing or debunking the banking concept of education, teachers and students plays both the important role of sharing their knowledge, wherein students can share their own funds of knowledge as well as the teachers, wherein both sides develop and interpret the messages of a certain text. Critical literacy in practice. The development of critical literacy encourages students to question issues of power, explicitly disparities within social contexts like socioeconomic status, race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and etc. Becoming critically literate means that the students have mastered the ability to read and critique messages in text in order to better understand whose knowledge is being privileged. Excuse us. Essentially, teachers using critical pedagogy demonstrate how to evaluate the function of language plays in the social construction of the self. Michelle Nobel and Colin Lancashire suggest that when students become critically literate, they can examine ongoing development, the parts they play in the world, and how they make sense of experiences. Facilitating the development of critical literacy promotes the examination and reform of social situations and exposes students to the biases and hidden agendas within texts. Thus, in order to become critically literate, one must learn to read in a reflective manner. The read in this connotation means to give meaning to messages of all kinds, instead of just looking at the words on the page and comprehending the meaning of those words. Instruction that encourages critical literacy development comes as a response to marginalization of growing social injustices. Furthermore, Adrian Blackage's critical literacy emphasizes the potential of written language. He quoted, "To be a tool for a people to analyze the division of power and resources in their society and transform discriminatory structures." Yes, there is a discriminatory structure, and you can eradicate this or eliminate this and transform this by the use of critical literacy. Critical literacy and social action. There is often an activist component to critical literacy. Education where the teachers serve as the facilitator of social change. Joseph Kretovic suggests that in addition to teaching students functional skills, the teachers must also provide conceptual tools necessary to critique and engage society along with its inequalities and injustices. Furthermore, with the activist potential in critical literacy education, students will learn how to envision a world in which all people have access and opportunity. When students learn to use the tools of critical literacy, they can expose, discuss, and attempt to solve social injustices within their own lives. When engaging in the development of critical literacy skills, students learn to acknowledge the unfair privileging of certain dominant discourses in which society engages. Students participate in conversation about the injustices of privileging one group or ideal over another because of skin color or socioeconomic status, and teachers can help to empower students by providing opportunities for them to find their voices. Teachers in the methods that support critical literacy can, as Lisa Delpit suggests, let our students know they can resist a system that seeks to limit them to the bottom rung of social and economic ladder. Critical literacy opens students' ability to resist or reconstruct a system wherein they can criticize and critically analyze the messages and meaning of a certain text. By developing lessons based on dialogue with students about their needs and interests, educators can invite students to take part in a larger community discourse that attempts to solve problems and create alternatives to oppressive situations. Linda Christensen suggests connecting the curriculum to the outside world in the tangible way. By participating in an action project or creating a public discourse, students may see the relation between curriculum and the world beyond the walls of the school. Essentially, students learn to restructure their knowledge base and challenge accepted societal norms in order to transform all institutions that oppress. This kind of idea or concept applies especially to those teachers who study or specialize in social studies. Curriculum should apply based on the needs and interests of the students as well as to their current status, wherein students can learn to restructure based on the challenge they are experiencing. Critical literacy in the classroom. Because critical literacy theory focuses on the relationships between language, power, social practice, and access to social goods and services, there are numerous methods of engaging students in becoming critical members of the society. Within the frame of critical literacy, it is important to look at texts like novels, magazine articles, short stories, films, and etc. through a lens that challenges societal norms. Students can evaluate whose knowledge is being privileged in text and deconstruct the message of those meanings. As readers, students must also evaluate the social construction of a text and question the factors that may have influenced the author to create the text in a specific manner. For example, No Limitangere and El Filibusterismo, written by Jose Rizal, describe the situation of Filipinos by the hands of the Spaniards. Jose Rizal wrote this two novels to describe the struggles and oppression that Filipinos experienced during the Spanish occupation. Edwin Berman explains that development of critical literacy encourages social justice and exploration of language and literature in many forms. Berman suggests that the specific types of lessons examine power relationships that are found in language and literature, that these practices show students that language is never neutral. In terms of teaching critical literacy, there is no specific um, types of lessons that teachers should use, because critical literacy can be seen or can be understood through different lenses. That is why language is never neutral, and students should evaluate which side they must go in. Critical literacy. Berman maintains that developing a pedagogy that includes critical literacy is an organic process that continually needs to be revisited and refined. Berman reviewed articles published between 1999 and 2003 in the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy that focus on lessons and units emphasizing critical literacy pedagogy in middle and high school grades. Berman's search revealed that the most commonly used practices that support critical literacy included reading supplementary text, reading multiple text, reading from a resistant perspective, producing counter text, having students conduct research about topics of personal interest, and challenging students to take social actions. First, we have the reading supplementary text or supplemental text. Reading supplemental text, representative of today's changing media and technology, allows students to make connections with the literature or content being studied. To make connections with the literature, students don't need the exact or the textbook written or printed. Supplementary texts also provide the context for students to confront social issues that are often avoided by canonical works and or not covered in dated textbooks. To best describe reading supplemental text, how it can be applied to classroom. Classroom applications. Practitioners can use lyrics from popular music as supplementary text in order to engage students in discussions about race, gender, religions, and politics. Just like Glock 9, a Filipino singer who usually sing songs based on the Filipinos' experience to the government, just like the song Tao po na nakaupo, subukan nyo namang tumayo, at baka matanaw ninyo ang tunay na kalagayan ko. Those lyrics describe the situation of politicians and the Filipinos who does not experience the public service that they deserve with the public officials. This type of engagement with text appeals to students' interests, exposes them to the new forms of text, and also challenges the dominant ideology of the textbook, all of which are essential components of critical literacy. We should all know that textbooks are not just the only source for literature, because there are also some medias that can be used to replace literature, just like music, videos, and audios. The next one is reading multiple text. Incorporating multiple text based on similar literary themes offers students the opportunity to critique the value or voices that are being promoted. There are literature that is similar in nature, especially to messages and contents being expressed to that certain literature. With this different literature with similar contents, students can critique the value or voices from different people or authors, challenges the idea that meaning speaks, and encourages students to use evidence support their interpretation. Meaning and definitions varies according to what the person or author believes in. That is why multiple texts is very important for the students to understand and explore sources to better and critically analyze a certain text. In classroom application, an example of this practice would be offering students the choice of reading. Teachers should offer student a variety or wide variety of reading literature in order for the students to explore diverse perspective from different voices. By reading the diverse perspective of analogous themes and evaluating the voices authors, a student can assess the perspective of the authors in order to better understand their value systems and why characters were portrayed in a certain manner. And also, students can understand why authors wrote a certain meaning on that text or sentence or literature, and also understand the characters being portrayed on a certain manner. The next one is reading multiple text. Involves students, I'm so sorry, it should be reading resistant perspective. Involves students in their interpretation of a text from the viewpoint of the world and not just the common Eurocentric ideology often found in the standard text. When we say Eurocentric ideology, it believes that knowledge is fixed. That is why critical literacy encourages students to interpret text from different viewpoint or different point of view, not just with one standard text. This type of reading would be particularly effective and beneficial in social studies classes because it would offer students multiple perspectives of the same event. Just like in news, same event, just like in interpreting a certain history or social event, there is a same event. However, interpretations varies according to the one being the one examining that event. In classroom application, the resistant perspective approach and students learn to read a text using a functional grammar, dialectal, or by critiquing the broad choice of an author in a song or news report. The use of words or the articulation of the words of the author in a certain literature can also be examined and can confront certain stereotypes promoted by a text and deconstruct the meaning or value being privileged. Next one is producing a counter text. This involves having students generate narratives or other text, including multimedia creation, from a non-mainstream perspective. Producing countertext can serve to validate the thoughts, observations, and feelings of students and other underrepresented groups. In producing countertext, students generate their own perspective about the text they have read. With this perspective, observations and feelings of the students can be expressed smoothly and freely. In classroom application, practitioners recommended that countertext may be reproduced in reading logs, journals, weblogs, personal narratives, and student-created videos. When students produce countertext and evaluate the process they use in order to construct the text, they validate their own perspective. Because of this validation or reproducing countertext, students can also validate their own perspective. They can also study how and why their perspective are differ from other perspective, providing opportunities for student choice. Student choice in any type of research has long been touted by constructivist and critical pedagogists like John Dewey and Howard Gardner as an effective way to involve, encourage, and empower students to actively participate in the instruction or construction of the knowledge. In starting a research, students choose what kind of problem or research they have or they wanted to focus in or they focus to. Giving the students the opportunity to choose also gives them the opportunity to explore varied literature. In order to apply it in classroom, an example of providing student choice in assignments is participation in literature circles or book clubs. Students select books based on interest and then conduct research based on the theme or the context of the novel. Students select books based on their interests. Because students cannot work efficiently if they don't have interest with that certain literature they are studying. While reading chosen novels and discussing the historical or political context of the novel, students can evaluate why the author chose to write in a particular manner and hypothesize why the author may have privileged certain themes. Taking social action. It is very important for the students to take social action in order to improve their society, especially their community. Once students research and better understand aspects of their school or community, they may engage in projects to improve an area that is lacking. By taking research outside of the classroom, students can actually participate in society based on the information they discover. Other contemporary method. Incorporating media and technology. In critical literacy, incorporating media and technology became also an important tool to better understand literature. We all know that social media and technology offers variety of sources in terms of literature. Read between the lines of the media messages, question the interest behind them, and learn how to look for alternative ways to be informed or entertained. Yes, social media offers different information and literature, but it is very important for the student and readers to critically analyze messages between those lines posted and published on social media. Thank you for listening, but let's first check our achievements throughout this discussion. First, provide learning objectives. From the start of this discussion, we provided the learning objectives expected for the students to be attained. Clear learning objectives will guide instructor and students to the progress of the lesson. Next, identify students' learning reference. Learning preferences of students should be catered accordingly. I guess I catered all of the learning preferences of the students, especially you guys. Flexible learning instruction. As you observe, we use video recorded media as a flexible learning instruction for this session. Utilize valid and current teaching and learning resources. Teaching and learning should anchor 20% to 21st century standard and resources. Based on the discussion, I gave different examples based on the current situation of the Filipinos, especially to Glock 9 and the previous in the historical works of Rizal, especially to Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. And for the assessment, of course, it will be administered after this session. Reminder: evaluation or quiz for this chapter will be posted on our MS Teams. Thank you for listening again. This is Francis de la Peña, your discussant for today.